Well, hi there. Welcome to Art in Focus. I apologize for that little brief delay before I turned on my camera and microphone. Just before I did that, as I was turning off the music, my dogs decided to bark ferociously at something that happened outside. So I thought I'd spare everybody that and just wait a few beats. So welcome to Art in Focus. It's great to have people tuning in on both the Zoom presentation, as I see people kind of joining, as well as on the YouTube live stream. I gesture because I keep an eye on it down here to make sure there's no hiccups. I want to thank a couple people right off the bat. We had music compliments of Joe Rowan, who was one of our past guests on Art in Focus. And I'd also like to thank Community Healthcare Systems for sponsoring the Art in Focus series, as they have for a number of years. Well, welcome, like I said. I want to remind people that if you're on YouTube, that we won't be monitoring that chat feed. So if you ask a question in YouTube, we're happy to have you, but we're not going to see that. If you want to ask questions during any part of the presentation or at the end when we kind of do the more formal Q&A, then by all means, hop on over to the Zoom presentation and log in, and you'll be able to communicate with both our guests tonight as well as myself. I have a couple of quick announcements before we get started. The first is about our classes. South Shore Arts is still offering in-person classes, and in fact, we're offering a few more than we have, and they're filling up. So classes start at the end of the month, but registration's still open. And the good news is that 9 of our 11 in-person classes are already running. Doesn't mean they're all full, so you can still register for a lot of them, but they are already running. I believe the 2 that aren't running are both youth ceramics classes. So if you know anybody who's interested in doing that, and especially in our ceramic studio, we've had students in there all during the pandemic. We opened up the whole thing, so there's lots of space. Nobody's gotten sick, and they've had a really positive experience about that. And in fact, if you want, you can ask our guest tonight about our ceramics program, as well as what it's like in there during the pandemic. The second thing I want to mention is that Symphony is back. The Northwest Indiana Symphony Orchestra is back. We have scheduled 3 chamber concerts for the spring. The first one is to take place in April, and you can join that performance either in person at Living Hope Church, which has been our venue for the last couple of years, or you can watch online via a live stream. So you have 2 options. Those tickets are on sale at the Northwest Indiana Symphony Orchestra's website, and the tickets are $30 for in-person and $15 if you just choose to stay at home and watch it on the big TV and stream it live that night. One more thing I'd like to remind everybody is that this week we are here for Art in Focus with our guest Ryan, but next Art in Focus is on April 8th, and that'll be featuring myself and my friend Lou Joseph, who's been my collaborative partner on a project that we've been working on called the Colossus. So if you'd like to see me talk more about me, then by all means join us on April 8th. So I'm going to say a few words about our guest before I bring him on. Our guest tonight is Ryan Bennett. Ryan is an instructor with South Shore Arts, and he is also our studio coordinator. He's been with us for about 2 years now, and that's kind of hard to believe at this point. He started as an instructor, and now he's on staff, and he's still teaching. He's a graduate of Indiana University Northwest in their ceramics program, and he also has his own business, which is Infinite Roots Pottery, which you can ask him about, but he makes some lovely vessels that he sells under that business name. I like to think back to when Ryan first joined South Shore Arts. He came in on a rainy, gloomy day. I think recently graduated from IUN, and I was looking for anything to do but work that day. And Ryan was looking for a job. And so when he came in, I just stopped what I was doing and walked around the facility with him, asked him some questions, took his resume, and shortly thereafter, I kind of called him in for a formal interview so that we can see if he was a good fit for us. And it's worked out really well for, I know, us, and I hope he feels the same, because he's been a great addition to our program, our staff and our programs and Studio Arts. So I'm going to ask Ryan to come on and unmute himself and turn on his camera. And I'm going to make sure that everybody can see both of us. Need you to turn off, unmute yourself, Ryan, I think. There we go.
All right, how's that? Can you hear me fine?
We can now, Ryan. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the kind words and the nice introduction. Just go ahead from here.
Yeah, I mean, well, you want to introduce how? So I guess I didn't tell everybody how we're going to start this presentation and the two components of it. Would you like to just let people know what we're about to watch?
Yeah, definitely. So firstly, thank you for joining in, everybody who's tuned in right now. My name is Ryan Bennett, as you all know. You're basically, in for a presentation to give a perspective, or my perspective on art, ceramics specifically, and what it means in, my position as an artist. So I hope that you all enjoy. The presentation is actually pre-recorded. And so we're gonna go through a video, about 20-ish minutes. And then that's just me talking and speaking on everything, hopefully that you all can get from that, and get to know me a little bit better through that presentation. And then we're gonna open up for a Q&A afterwards where you can, ask me questions and I'll just go from there.
Great. So Ryan said it better than I could ever say it. So I know we just had Ryan join us, but I'm going to ask Ryan to mute himself and to turn off his camera. I'm going to do the same. We're going to watch a little bit, a little movie that we shot of Ryan in the studio, practicing his craft. So here we go. Hang with us for just a second as we transition.
Art for me is basically a way for me to interpret the world around me, and it basically helps me articulate my thoughts and how I process it all. So for me, making art is more so focused on like the process of making art than the actual finished piece. And I feel like for me that's true for any form of art that I make, whether it be sculpture or ceramics or anything that I'm producing. It's mainly focused more so on the process of making it. And then, once I do get a finished piece, and I guess this is more so true for the sculpture installations that I make. The process of, I guess, using it, because I usually don't make things that you just look at. I make things I focus more so on nature a lot, where I would basically just use my, I guess, intuitive wandering to go out in like a natural environment, whether it be like the woods or whatever. Usually it's the woods because that's where I tend to go when I like meditate and sort of escape regular society and stuff, just to be in my own thoughts. I tend to go to the woods a lot, so my art is somewhat of a reflection of that. So when I go out into the woods and I make something to interpret how I see, I'm usually using materials from the woods. So like for instance, when I did my senior thesis, the show that I had to put on in order to get my BFA, I used tree bark from the swamp cottonwood, and then I used mushrooms. I don't know what type of mushrooms, but I used mushrooms that was growing on the cottonwoods. I used seashells from seashells, but freshwater snail shells, because that particular wooded area would flood in certain times of the year. So I just kind of used I even used the soil. I used different materials that I found out in the woods and basically just rearranged it to where I can create this environment in a gallery setting to where people can kind of see what I see and experience what I experience when I'm out there without actually having to go out there. It's sort of like I'm narrating the vibes of the environment so that way. Because people can go out in nature, and they do all the time. Like they can go anywhere, whether it be out in nature or just anywhere on this earth, and have a completely different experience. But if I take the same materials and I arrange it in a certain way to where, it speaks a certain value of my own interpretations, then they'll have some type of, feel for that. At least that's the goal. Yeah, the book. So the book is basically about the, I guess, revelations that I would get through making my art. And in those, things that would come to me through making art, because as I said before, art for me is more so about like, the process and, interpreting the world around me. So like, it's sort of like my thought process. So the book is basically documenting, my conclusions that I would make. But mostly through my art making and whatnot. I have a section in there right now that focuses strictly on, this, like making pottery on the wheel, throwing clay on the wheel, and it sort of touches on, the qualities of the clay itself, the circular motions, the clay just continuously moving, but, just guiding the clay and everything. And I sort of draw a parallel between that and, a walk through life and how life goes and how you sort of just, are guided in certain directions and whatnot. So I think that's, the book is more so just, a form of literature that's, I guess, speaking more directly toward what's going on than the actual pieces themselves. When it's putting context behind the pieces that I make. So, and even that in itself is just sort of helping me think, like, making the book is different from creating because I'm actually using words and the thought process is different. But as I'm writing the book, I'm sort of having that same feel, intuitive. I'm intuitive in the way that I might choose my words in the order that I might speak about a particular topic. The overall, form of the book, the book becomes like an art piece describing me as an artist and my thought process while making other forms of art. And like I said, drawing a parallel between that and life. To me, that's what this is all about. It's just understanding this thing that we're all doing, this experience that we're all having. And this, for me, is the best way that I can do it. And it's really helping me. And hopefully it helps other people too, spark thoughts in them and, have them basically do the same thing, but in their own way.
Have you always been a writer, or is that a new form?
This is my first time writing something like a book. But yes, I write or have written a lot of poetry. I would say starting back since, like maybe high school. Yeah, early stages of high school. What got me into writing poetry? I don't know. If I sat down and thought about it long enough, I could probably come up with something. But poetry is another form of outlet for me. Whenever I have a certain opinion about something, or, just feel a certain way, I can get it out with words more so than I could by making a piece of art and visual art representations. Whether that be pottery or whatever. And that's the thing too. I'm not just limited to ceramics. This is my go-to because I can relate to it. I can relate to clay more than I can any other medium. But at the same time, I don't just use this medium to express myself and interpret the world around me. It depends on how I feel and what will best, execute that expression. So sometimes words can't do it. Sometimes, words just are incapable of being that medium that I can express myself through. So I'll do it with something that you can just look at. And then sometimes I'll do something, and put up an installation to where you just have to experience it. If you take pictures of that installation, you wouldn't really get the full picture behind what I was doing. You'd have to be there and, walk through it and touch it and smell it even. And that actually just made me think of another point too, is that a lot of people might think of art as just something that you can look at, whether it be performance art or visual art or anything like that, or something that you can hear, such as a song, music, poetry, whatever. But really, it's just anything, the way that I perceive it, it could be anything that you can take in through your senses, I think it all adds to the experience. So, and I think I don't know why I have this particular opinion, but like, when it comes to art, you can make something to where people can look at it, but it's always going to be in the context of other things, such as, for instance, an art gallery. If you take the Mona Lisa or whatever type of, like a Basquiat painting, and you put it in an art gallery, it'll be in context of that, in context of visual observation, Or if you take that same work of art and put it in a, public bathroom at a gas station, it'll be in the context of that. So it's not just the art piece that's going to be speaking to the viewer. It's going to be the overall experience. It's going to be the context of it. So and sometimes I gravitate towards certain things and don't realize why till afterwards. So I actually started off in doing three-dimensional art in bronze metal. Something that, it takes a lot, on a certain aspect, in certain respects it pollutes the earth. Melting that metal and just the whole process of like how to get it and different things that go along with all of that. But I did that when I started sculpture at the university I was going to, and I think a year after I started that, they tore down the foundry and built a different building, another art building. That had a lot of things, but they never did replace the foundry. So that forced me to basically look at another medium. Well, I would always sculpt my sculptures in clay before covering it with wax. It was a wax loss method. So I was already sort of familiar with the clay. So I'm like, well, what if I just sculpted the clay and just fired it that way and let that be the work of art? And and yeah, that's exactly what I started doing, and it really just, I guess it spoke to me later on. You know, I started getting more and more curious about the clay because I felt that it resonated with me so much that, you know, like where does it come from? You know, I mean, I knew it came from the earth, but like how is it formed? You know, like how does clay come to be clay? You know, what other materials do you use in ceramics? Like where do they come from? And come to find out, a lot of it's just minerals, more earth, oxides, more earth. You know, and yeah, just the qualities of it, the way that it's, you know, malleable, you know, that you can just turn it in. It's like a solid that you can form into any shape. So it's like arguably a liquid. You know, it can exist in both stages and take on the form of many things. It can basically just take on the form of your imagination. So I think that's what really, you know, brought me to clay, brought me to stay with clay versus any other medium.
All right, so I'm going to ask Ryan to turn on his camera and to turn on his microphone. We'll give him a second there. All right. I'm gonna make sure that he and I are both spotlighted appropriately so you see us both. There we go, looks good. So Ryan, we've already had so first I wanna say, I think you have the honor of having the most hypnotic and mesmerizing art and focus to date in the nearly 3 years that I've done this now. It helps when you have a thing spinning, right?
Right.
But it was lovely to watch. And I also want to mention that Summer Sheringhausen, our director of education, shot that video as well as edited it on iMovie, which is something she wasn't asked to do when we hired her. So it's really appreciate her stepping up and doing what was needed. It's a little bit of a joke there, but you know, we all do what we have to do, I guess. Ryan, I know we have a presentation of a few images, but as you were on, a few questions came in, so I thought maybe we would see if I haven't even looked at them yet, but see if there's some questions that can transition us into the slides. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Great. So Emily, who I believe asked, what part of a plant do you find most inspiring for your pieces? I guess what part of like a natural sort of plant or something in nature do you find most inspiring for your pieces?
I've never been asked that question before. I would say the roots. I like I know you don't really see the roots of the plant, you know, until you like uproot it, obviously. But the reason being is because it's one of the first parts of the plant to be established. And, it's just so many metaphors that I can, parallel between, that I can link between roots and how they operate and how, I operate as a person. And just, different lessons, about life can be parallel to roots. So.
Good answer. So I want to also remind people that you can, once Ryan answers your question, you can always follow up if you want to keep engaging him. I do want to make sure we get to the slides in a minute. We have one more question already queued up. But it's okay too if you want to raise your hand. I don't always catch it, but if you raise your hand and you just want to ask that question directly to Ryan, I can turn on your ability to talk as well, and you can just have a little conversation with Ryan. So Ryan, before we move on to that presentation, somebody said, they're anonymous, the same thing I said about it being mesmerizing, but they wanted to know if you have that same effect when you're throwing on the wheel, or is it a different sensation when you watch someone else throwing as to when you are the one actually doing the craft, right, when you're on the wheel?
No, it's definitely mesmerizing for me to be on the wheel. And I think that's a big part, like just the motion of it spinning in a circle, but also progressing forward. So it's like with each rotation, it evolves into something that it wasn't before. And to me, it is mesmerizing, and it sort of puts me in a meditation mode. So when I'm on the wheel and I'm making something, I'm not really, consciously, I'm focused on what I'm making, but there's so much that goes into it that takes me out of what I'm actually doing and just sort of lets me, live in my thoughts and whatnot.
All right. So, all right. So I know I said we would transition, but you know what? I'm going to hold this question for just a second. I want to get your slides up. Maybe we can filter it in as we're looking at your slides, but I want to make sure we have enough time to show some finished products that you've created as well. So don't do anything with your camera. Don't do anything with your sound. I'm going to throw that presentation up, and then you're going to talk, and people might ask questions. I might ask questions. So let me do that again. Let me share my screen. Oh, actually, let me cancel for a second to pull up the presentation. There we go. All right, there it is. And I am going to all right. So, oh, I jumped ahead. All right, Ryan, you're good to go. Oh, there we go. So do you want to say anything about this as we go, or do you want me to kind of filter through? I can keep an eye on the Q&A as well as let's exit full screen.
Yeah, no, I can sort of narrate and just talk about each picture and sort of what brought it about and I guess what it means to me. So this first picture, this vase that I threw, is actually, at the time, it was one of the largest pieces that I've ever thrown. At the time that I made this, I was focused more so on working bigger. So just as I said in the presentation, how I like to use my art as a way of interpreting the beauty that I see out in nature. That is also true for my pottery. So whenever I make pottery, I make sure, or it's not like, intentional, like I make sure, but just inherently it's gonna, mimic what I see out in nature just because that's what I'm mostly focused on expressing. So like, for instance, this vase here, the colors and the way that I might have glazed a certain piece, the shapes, how it's like, it has the curves and everything, how you see out in nature, such as like the leaves and the mushroom and, whatever else that you see is more organically shaped and the colors too. So I like to make my pottery, being inspired by natural environments to where if it was in a natural environment, how you see it here in the picture, that it'll sort of blend in, you know, in a sense. So that's the look that I always go after.
Great. So I'm going to keep moving through these. I want to let people know I'm going to try to get the question and answer back up, but I went into full screen and I'm trying not to disrupt our presentation with me opening and closing windows. So I'm going to try to pull up the Q&A in the chat now while Ryan talks a little bit about this piece and maybe get some questions in there.
Yeah, so this piece specifically was inspired and it came out so, you know, good, like as far as the execution of the glaze. I wanted to, for this piece, I wanted to mimic natural bird eggs, like how you might see a robin's egg or, you know, the small eggs that you see. And they usually are nestled in the ground. Sometimes, not necessarily robin's eggs, but sometimes you'll see these pieces nestled in the ground. And again, you know, I just like to make artwork that sort of blends into with nature if you were to set it in a natural environment. So this is, you know, another example of that. This is actually taken at the beach. Oh, I guess that's a good point to make too. I like to focus on the natural environments that, you know, are local and that I actually go to as well. I mean, I really like all nature, you know, even the nature that I haven't really been to yet, but I also like to keep it true to my experiences that I'm expressing too. So a lot of times it's inspired by nature that I've personally, you know, experienced.
So, I mean, I'm going to ask a question and I hope it comes out like a question
Right.
when I'm done talking, which is always a risk you take when you open your mouth. But so the way you document your work, and I'm moving to the next one because it just further illustrates that, like, at least all the images that are in this presentation are the, you know, the vessels, the pottery is in nature. And to you, is this just a convenient or attractive way to document your work, or is the documentation of these earthen vessels that are inspired by nature, is that part of the art to have the finished, like, is that the way you imagine it? Like, once I make this, I'm going to take a picture of it here because that's the completion of the artistic act? Or is it just like, because it looks, I mean, to me, there's no right or wrong answer, but like, I'm just curious.
Well, for me, I am a strong believer in context. So in the importance of context. So when I make a piece, and this to me is true for all art, that if you take a piece of art, that it'll honestly have different meanings when you place it in different spaces. So for my pottery, how I like to, you know, mimic nature and have nature inspire some of the looks and the glazes and the texture. To take a finished piece to the environment in which it was inspired by, for me as an artist, is giving, and photographing it, for me as an artist, it's giving that piece of artwork the context, you know, that one can look at and say, oh, I see where this came from, or I see where, you know, the inspiration was, you know, when making this piece. So it's just, you know, a matter of giving the artwork more context, because, you know, that same piece, if I were to take that and place it in on a pedestal inside of a gallery, might not have the same effect, you know, on the viewer if the viewer, you know, as would it, you know, have the viewer seen it in the beach, you know, how you see it here.
Yeah, and I think I definitely like when, and I know a little bit about you from talking about pottery with you a few times, right? So like when I see the work, I can kind of also just get there, right? Like, you know, oh, this is, you know, the palette you choose, right? And the clay body that I know you work with being sort of like browner and earthier looking in nature. You were instrumental in us changing our clay body to the clay body we have in the South Charlotte shop. But, you know, I can get to this like connection to nature, but like when I see your your vessels photographed in context of nature, I ask myself different questions. Whether those connections are there, I start to ask myself, like, was it inspired by this, right? Or is it important that, you know, it's on this sand or these rocks or near this vegetation? Because I also know that, and I don't know if any of these pots, these vessels, this is true to, I don't know if this applies to any of them, but I do know also that you do some experimentation with like additives and locally sourced materials and things on occasion. So I started asking myself those questions. And I don't know if you want to respond to that, but that's just sort of an observation. And then the other thing I would also say is that, like, it's kind of interesting to hear you talk about a body of work that I've never seen, which is your thesis exhibition, where you kind of recreated nature inside, but now you take this sort of nature that's been processed by your hands in an inside environment, and then you take it back and you put it outside. So I think that that's kind of fun, that back and forth, how it's like fluid. Your studio doesn't have walls anymore. It's almost like you go back and forth.
Yeah, and I think it's important too when I'm sharing my artwork with others, because they, you know, like I said, they might not go to those natural environments. They might not see it that way. So, you know, I look at my art too, you know, as not just an expression of, you know, the things that I see and the things that I'm inspired by, but I also want to bridge the gap between the viewer and, you know, the beauty that I see when I go out in nature and whatnot, to get them to have that, you know, same or similar experience that might, you know, lead them to, you know, have more respect for natural environments than they had before, you know, whatever have you.
Yeah. So Ryan, I'm going to keep going through some images here. I know there aren't that many, and because I can't bring up the Q&A when I'm in this view for whatever reason, I want to make sure people have an opportunity to ask questions. So I'm going to keep moving through, and if you want to say anything about any of these, you know, just tell me to hold up or go backwards.
Sure. Well, you can go backwards, either or. Just to talk a little bit about, you know, these. It was a body of work that I was doing that, or I guess I should say, still am doing, but it's also inspired by different cultures. I get inspired a lot by, you know, Aztec patterns. A lot of my inspiration comes from African tribal patterns, because I believe that culture is very significant. So sometimes I like to represent, you know, culture or certain, you know, patterns that might be seen within a certain, you know, range of people, because, you know, I just like to put that in my pottery as well as, you know, keeping the earth tones and the textures and whatnot, because I feel like they are connected. When you have a certain culture, a culture is a way of life, you know, and if I can, you know, represent culture and love for nature in the same, you know, art piece, then I think that might speak a lot to, you know, as far as when the viewer think about how they interact and, you know, start thinking about their personal culture and the things that they do on a daily basis that might be, you know, translated into tradition, and how that has an effect on nature, or at least get them thinking in that realm of space.
Interesting. We already went to this photo. This is a very striking piece of documentation. It's so interesting. It's unlike the other ones.
Yeah, this specific piece, it was a happy accident. It was a happy accident. This piece was, when I seen this piece come out of the kiln, what you're seeing as far as the texture was actually a chemical reaction as a result of over reduction during the firing process, and it reacted with the glaze and made that specific texture. So, you know, and that's sometimes, like, you know, well, I shouldn't even say sometimes, a lot of times with ceramics, things come out the way, or not the way that you intended it to come out. And this was one of those pieces. But, you know, when you get a piece out of the kiln, it's either you love it or you hate it. You know, you learn to live with it. and some things you just accept it. But this piece, I actually loved it when it came out of the kiln, and it was one of my higher prized pieces.
Well, I love the sentiment about, when things go into the kiln, they might come out different than you expect, and you kind of have to accept that as part of the ceramics process. I think that's a thing that, in our studio environment, we really try, especially with beginning students, to get across, because it can be somewhat disappointing that first time something comes out and you expected it to look different after all that work.
Yeah, it's definitely a learning process. And for me, as a beginner, I should just add on to what you said. I was one of those students who would get so frustrated because my pieces, they would come out not the way that I intended. They would break, all sorts of things. And then after a while, I began to not focus so much on the end product, but just enjoy the process, just enjoy the making of it and whatnot. And then if it do come out, in a way that makes me not happy or whatever, you move on and you make another piece. And that's a big part of being a ceramicist.
I'm going to try to take that piece of advice and apply it to my practice in my life, Ryan, because that's something I could definitely work on. I want to move to the next slide, but I also want to ask you to briefly describe something, or to the listeners and watchers rather, who I guess we should call them viewers rather than watchers. But I want to ask you to describe what reduction is and how that's different from what happens in our kilns. Because when you described it to me the first time when we visited the ceramics workshop at IUN, I was just really it was just very fascinating to me.
Well, it is fascinating, and reduction is one of my, I really like the way that it fires, and I like the way that it comes out. And I actually like just knowing what happens in the kiln during the reduction process. So
the part I like a lot.
As a lot of people know, fire needs oxygen in order to be fire. In order to keep the combustion process going, it needs oxygen as part of the equation. And no matter what, the fire is going to use the oxygen to sustain itself, no matter where it gets it from. So, obviously, if there's oxygen present in the air, then, it'll just get it from the air. But in the reduction process, what's very unique about that is that as the flame, or as the kiln is firing, what you would actually do is decrease the amount of air going into the kiln, and therefore the fire that's going into the kiln is almost suffocating in a way. So you're reducing the amount of oxygen that's going into the kiln, and the only way that the flame will sustain itself is to grab oxygen molecules from the glaze and the clay and whatever artwork is in the kiln at the time. So the artwork is essentially giving off oxygen to the fire that's firing the pottery. So it's basically helping, the firing process, and the fire feeds off of the pottery, and the pottery, in a sense, is feeding off of the fire because it's helping to get the clay and the glaze to a mature temperature.
That's so fascinating to me. I love that. I didn't want to pass up the opportunity for us to talk about that a little bit.
Oh, definitely.
So I want to give some time for some questions. We're getting very close to the end. We have at least this image, maybe another one. Why don't do you want to say anything more about what we have on the screen here?
Well, yeah, definitely. This is actually the first, well, aside from the one that I said was over reduced, but using the clay and glaze that's in the actual studio here at South Shore, this is the first piece that I've actually made like this out of the whole series of, that the other picture that you had brought up where it was like a whole, body of work like that. This was the first one.
Gotcha. Very cool. And then similar, the same series, it looks like.
Oh, so for everybody that's watching right now, I love food. I love food. So just to add on to an earlier question, I think it came from Emily. Um, what's my favorite part of the plant? I'll also add whatever part of the plant that I can eat. Yeah, but yeah, I love making functional dishes because that is a big part of, my love for nature is, one of the main ways that we interact with nature is our food. Our food is, it all comes from nature. So I also like to throw that in with my work as a ceramicist to make stuff that you can actually cook with or eat out of or drink out of or, etc. So.
Oh, and there we are. So, I'd like to make sure that everybody has an opportunity who's on Art in Focus can talk about, promote themselves and their work and their business if they happen to have one. So these are places that you can find Ryan as well as his work and also purchase his work. So I'll leave those up there for just a minute so people can kind of write those down. I wonder if I can grab at least this one. Can I grab that? No, I can't grab it. That's the end. Let's go back real quick. Maybe I'll try to grab that real quick and put it in the, what's it called? The chat feature and so everybody can copy and paste that if they want. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the share. I'll go grab that online. We have a question right now and from Michelle Golden, and she wants to know how old you were when you knew that you wanted to become an artist. And we just talked about that before we came on live today. So why don't you answer that and other people can queue up and I'll go find that link so that we could put it in the chat for you.
All right, cool. So to answer your question, I think, well, all my life I was, always artistic and making stuff and drawing stuff or whatever. But when I decided that I would, I guess, take it serious and when it really became a big part of my life, I guess going back a little bit before my college days when I made it my major, I would have to give credit to my high school art teacher, Mr. Thomas. He encouraged me to make art that I never really would have otherwise thought was art. And he basically, we were making mixed media art and he had told me to, he knew that I love nature and whatnot. So he had told me to go outside and, just pick whatever and glue it to this paper. And I'm like, anything. So essentially the way that I made that piece was I went out and I forged for, whatever I thought was, a work of art or whatever. And I would just add it to this piece and I called it mixed media. So funny enough, later on in my college days, as I sort of ventured through 2-dimensional art and 3-dimensional art and working in wood and casting in bronze metal and then finding my way to ceramics, by the time I graduated and I did my senior thesis was done the same way that Mr. Thomas had me do that first piece of art. That mixed media piece of art. And I did that, as I said earlier, by going out into the woods, foraging for materials. And only thing is I didn't glue them to a piece of paper, but, similarly enough, I had, took them and I, screwed them to the walls and sat them on the floor and hung them from the ceilings and whatnot and created this whole environment that people can actually experience and walk through and, touch and whatnot. So, yeah. Age-wise, I know I kind of deviated from the question, but age-wise, so I say that was maybe sophomore year of high school. So whatever age that is, maybe 14, 15-ish. And then by the time I did my senior thesis, I was still in my 20s, so.
I think that it's good of you to go back to answer the question as it was asked, but I think a good thing, you haven't done a lot of artist talks, I know. I think a good thing to remember is that if you give them a good story, they're not going to be concerned if you don't answer. Maybe, you know what? I'm going to say they're not going to be concerned if you don't answer the question. But on the other hand, maybe people are, and they don't like me. And so you should probably ask other people for their opinion as well, because I might be wrong. So I put Ryan's Etsy store up in the chat window, the link to it, so people can go check it out. There's lots of stuff in there right now. I've looked in the past when it's been more meager pickings or nothing at all. So I'm going to make sure I go back to that as well. Does anybody else have I have some questions we can close on. We're almost, we have 3 minutes. I try to keep it a tight hour. So I would like to make sure that nobody else has any questions before we wrap it up. I can talk to Ryan all day. It's always such a joy. I'm not surprised by his presentation because I've known Ryan now for a couple of years, even though we don't see each other all the time. And each time I spend any amount of time with you, Ryan, I'm always struck by what a contemplative sort of individual you are and how intentional and thoughtful. I'm not surprised by the presentation or any of the things you said tonight, because it's just perfectly in character with you. And it's been a real joy to have this time to look at your work and have you kind of walk through it. I'm going to ask one closing question that's only tangentially related. And I always feel bad when I put people on the spot with a question like this, but and don't worry, it's not that kind of personal or sharp. But you mentioned that you write poetry, and I'm just curious: are there poets who have inspired you in the past? Are there people you go to read, since that's a form you use?
Not formally. I mean, poetry for me has always been, I don't know, just sort of my way of expressing myself through, literature, just like, writing things and whatnot. I did take a poetry class, and then, just music, songs and whatnot, it's a form of poetry or whatever. So, yeah, no, I don't have any specific people that inspire me in the poetry realm. When I hear a nice song, it might inspire me, but
I gotcha. I can live with that answer. So I'm going to thank Ryan again just for joining us. We're just about a minute before 8. I want to remind everybody, I got my notes over here, so I'm sorry I'm not making eye contact. I want to thank the people who joined us on YouTube as well. And I want to thank Community Healthcare Systems again for sponsoring Art in Focus, and Joe Rowan for letting us use a few of his tracks as our intro music. Full disclosure, I did that without asking him for a number of times. And then one time he tuned in and said, "Hey, that's my music." And I said, "Yeah, I've been meaning to ask you about that. What do you think?" And he went along with it. So I want to thank him for being so amenable. And we love using that music, and we love having Joe join us. Remind everybody that Art in Focus, the next Art in Focus is April 8th. It'll be myself and Lou Joseph talking about the Colossus. Tell your friends, tell your enemies. Maybe that's better even, make them waste an hour listening to some guy ramble on about his artwork. And I want to also make sure to thank IUN for being a good partner to South Shore Arts and promoting tonight on Instagram what's happening here with Ryan and I on our Art in Focus presentation, and also for giving Ryan a place to study his craft and then be able to come and contribute so much to South Shore Arts. Final reminder that Art in Focus recordings will be archived by Monday at 10 a.m. following the presentation. So Ryan's will be up by Monday. Sometimes they're up right away, but we embed them on our website by 9 o'clock or by 10 o'clock on Monday morning. And subscribe, tell your friends. And we have people who join us every week, and the numbers range widely or very widely. But the one thing I can say with certainty is that people are watching these afterwards. And so we appreciate that. We wouldn't do it if people weren't watching, and we're glad to be able to do the Art in Focus program this year despite circumstances. So please share the links, and tell your friends where they can find Art in Focus. Ryan, you and I will be able to talk many more times in the years to come, and I just want to thank you one last time before we sign off.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share my work with other people. And thank you everybody who's watching and for asking good questions and, being interested.
Great.
So,
all right, everybody. Good night, Ryan.
All right, take care.